I wasn't sure what to expect when I started playing Pandora Tomorrow. The first mission didn't give me the best first impression. It was too tutorial-y. I can see why Chaos Theory did away with having a tutorial mission and provided instructional video clips instead. What didn't help was that Sam only has his pistol to deal with the guards in the final stretch of the mission. Their patrols are erratic, and they practically go into full alert if you get too close to them. At this point, I didn't know I could change a pistol's aiming reticle over to the laser dot, so I couldn't rely on making headshots if I wasn't already at point-blank range. And even though the dot does help, there's still a lot of sway in Sam's arms to be truly reliable. Of course, none of this matters if I can sneak up behind a guard and spam the crouch button while moving at a steady clip, but at that point, I'm just cheesing the game. Thankfully, the guards in the rest of the campaign aren't as bad as these tutorial guards, so I can easily sneak up and elbow them. It's not clear how loud you can be in every environment, and knowing that made me appreciate Chaos Theory's sound meter even more than I already did. When it comes to comparing Pandora Tomorrow's missions to the first games or Chaos Theory's, it's no surprise that Pandora Tomorrow missions feel like better versions of the first game. A lot of that has to do with how certain set pieces seem to be iterations of moments that happened in the first game. For instance, Paris has a moment where you have to prevent the enemies from destroying a computer before you can secure its evidence, and it feels like a redux of a set piece in one of the first game's Chinese embassy missions. Right after securing the evidence, the game then warns you that a bomb is set to go off, and a timer appears to show you how long you have to defuse it. There's a similar moment in Kalina Tech, and funny enough, this is where both games introduce motion-sensitive hazards to the player. There are two missions where you have to tail a target until they reach a destination, and use surveillance equipment to eavesdrop on their convos. The first game introduced this type of objective in the Defense Ministry mission, and it's practically a staple maneuver by now, but all three games like to hide sentry turrets in areas that occlude your vision with fog or steam. But despite all the riffing that Pandora Tomorrow does on the first game, that doesn't mean this game is just a straight rehash. Although the missions are still broken up almost like acts in a Sonic stage, I think Pandora Tomorrow swings for the fences when it comes to ambitious concepts. You feel it as early as the second mission. You start from an enclosed space, not unlike the second half of the oil refinery in the first game. But once you drop down and reach the end of this path, you end up looking down a train tunnel and seeing the first of many level gimmicks, a train that intermittently passes by and floods the area with light. This gimmick prepares you for what to expect from the rest of the game, as the mission immediately after this one puts you on an actual train, and another mission at the end of the campaign puts you in the middle of a thunderstorm, with lightning occasionally exposing you to the enemy without the luxury of fixed cover the way the train tunnels did. The same goes with the introduction to motion detectors. They start off as wall fixtures that keep you in check if you're moving too quickly in a given space in an office setting, and they return in the jungle with an expanded range. That jungle environment impressed me, even if it was essentially just a field of tall grass. Something about how modern games use particles to generate tall grass doesn't feel as impressive when it comes to how they collide with the player, like these do with Sam. The second half of that mission blew my mind when it comes to what these games could do with scale. After going through a series of bamboo huts that gradually get more advanced interiors, you reach a dockyard for a submarine and raise it out of the water. The second half of that mission puts you in the dockyard, which I already find impressive because of the sheer size of the space, but then it has you going into the sub itself, like a level within a level. The level design inside the sub is very basic, almost a deconstruction of stealth game design, but I love that it's in direct contrast to the previous section, which provided alternate routes for you to reach the dockyard, and the gimmick ends before its novelty wears off. By the time you've seen everything the submarine can throw at you, you're already back at the top of its entrance and making your way to the mission's exit. Besides the missions themselves, I think it's also important to consider how the campaign arranges the missions so that their distinct qualities contrast with one another. The mission that takes place entirely on a train is constantly reminding you of how restricted the space is and how limited your options are for getting around. And the following mission in Jerusalem is the exact opposite. It's expansive, with broad streets and plenty of shadows for you to move about. It's almost like playing a thief map in third person. And once you've snuck past all the trains and urban environments, you get to the Indonesia levels that feature jungle terrain and guerrilla camps. I think about how the starting areas for Jerusalem and Jakarta are both city environments, but they don't feel like they're copying each other. Jerusalem feels like an old city. The skybox is littered with tombstones and primitive-looking structures, and it's the darkest that the city areas can get in the game. In contrast, Jakarta feels congested. Neon signs impose themselves on the sides of the buildings, and the insertion point overlooks an alley that's occupied by 4 men, urging you to take the rooftops to get by. So far, Most of my comparisons have been with the first game instead of Chaos Theory, so I'll say this. I think on average, Pandora Tomorrow's levels don't reach the highs of Chaos Theory's, but they also never reach the lows. I've said before that I think the Bank, Displaced, and Hokkaido are the best Chaos Theory missions, and that Seoul and the Bathhouse are the worst. But I like the Dockyard and Submarine in Pandora Tomorrow a lot more than the cargo ship in Chaos Theory, and that's mostly due to the fact that I never really got the feeling that I was on a boat in Chaos Theory, because the spaces were too claustrophobic. With the Dockyard, that open space helped me take in the spectacle that was a submarine, almost like a picture frame. And even though the sub itself was a series of simple tunnels with nooks and crannies, it sold me on the idea that I was sneaking around in a submarine. I've been holding off on talking about it at length for now, but the train mission is now my favorite Splinter Cell level. Not just in Pandora Tomorrow, but for the series as a whole, more than the Bank or Displaced or Hokkaido. Like the sub, you can't move around as freely on the train as you could any other mission, but you get to move through the interior and exterior of the train, underneath it, on top of it, and alongside it. The objective is a simple tailing mission, and the only combat encounter is at the end and easily avoidable. But the spectacle of shimmying along the side of the train and avoiding the passenger stairs, and the threat of another train whipping by in the opposite direction, ready to tear me off the sides, is gonna stay with me for a while. Also, when I learned about the skip that speedrunners use on the train, I had to see for myself how easy it was to pull off, and that adds to the level's charm. I don't think there were any bad missions, but there were bad encounters. If you're trying to go non-lethal in Jerusalem, you're gonna have a bad time dealing with the snipers at the end of the mission. Also, the Jakarta mission felt like it was jam-packed with level gimmicks, to the point where, after getting through the city streets, the lightning gimmick, and the sewer area, seeing the minefield surrounding the sniper tower with spotlights felt like the mission was bordering on farce. And this was only the first half of the mission. You know what? I take it back. Jakarta's a bad mission. Kudong Camp is also annoying in the second half because the tailing objective takes over most of the playtime. I do find it weird how Pandora Tomorrow has 3 missions set in Indonesia back-to-back and 2 in Paris. Now that I've used the new maneuvers that are exclusive to Pandora Tomorrow, I can say with certainty that I don't feel like I'm missing out in their absence in Chaos Theory. It's not that the SWAT turn or the split jump boost aren't useful, but rather the level design doesn't really make much use of them, but for specific situations. Like, you have to use a SWAT turn to cross this gap in the submarine to avoid detection, or along this path to avoid the people praying in Jerusalem, or this guy in LAX. And the only split jump routes I found useful were in the area leading up to the dockyard and the newsroom in Jakarta. I do like how the controls have done away with having to select lockpicks or the opticam to use them on doors, and led towards the use of an action list for Chaos Theory. But going into the menu to select your equipment causes a hard cut in the audio track, so I end up scrolling through my inventory with tab to keep the radio chatter going when I record my runs. This is entirely my personal preference, but I think Pandora Tomorrow has the best final boss encounter in the original trilogy, simply because there are no bullshit moments. The Presidential Palace mission has 2 mandatory fights that happen back-to-back at the very end, and I've harped on the boiler room set piece in the bathhouse before, but the fight leading up to it is really inconsistent as to how easily the enemy factions can spot you when all hell breaks loose. In the end, I found myself liking Pandora Tomorrow a lot more than I expected to, even in favor over Chaos Theory at times. It sucks that there's no official way to play this game on PC, but it runs surprisingly well on modern machines with a fan-made widescreen patch. The only issues I've had are that the game will occasionally crash if I let a cutscene play out, but it's not that much of a hassle to boot the game up again. If you enjoy classic Splinter Cell, but only played the first and third game like I did, Pandora Tomorrow is worth checking out.